Let's do it.
Oh, okay. Identify however you want. The floor is yours.
Cool. Hey, everybody. Excited to be doing this. My name is Curtis Waslow. I am 10 months sober and founder of the Sober app. I'll talk more about that in my, later half of my successes. But my addiction to alcohol and cocaine over the last 15, 20 years of my life, that's what I'm going to dig into. I didn't have a war story. I had a war story, but it was a little different. You hear about drug addiction and you think, trauma or living on the streets. I wasn't like that. I grew up in Maple Ridge, British Columbia, just outside Vancouver, Canada. I had an amazing family. My parents are still together. 3 older siblings. We're all really close, best friends growing up. We're all 2 years apart. Having 3 older siblings, I wasn't bullied in school. Having 3 older siblings, I would always follow in their footsteps. When I got into elementary school, everyone knew me. When I got into high school, everyone knew me. Everyone in the town of Maple Ridge, you're a Waslow, you're set. We're a very popular family. My parents were socialites, parties, family dinners every week, couple of times, drinking. It was the norm. So having the 3 older siblings and my parents being, social, I, got into drinking probably when I was about 13, I think, 12, 13, trying it out. Garage, my parents brewed their own wine, so there's always white wine that they brewed on their own, hundreds of bottles in the garage. You would sneak some. First time I ever got drunk or high was when I was 13. Came home, my brother was having a house party and his buddy owned a skate store, and I was really big into skateboarding. And they said, if you do a beer bong and take a bong hoot, and I'll give you a free skateboard tomorrow, like $150 skateboard. I'm like, done. And I did it, and I was probably 110 pounds soaking wet at that age. And I was, put me on my ass, but I liked the feeling of it. It was cool. And not only that, being around everyone who was like, yeah, Kurt, that was kind of, I think, what I liked more is being a part of something. And going through high school, like I said, I was very popular. I wasn't, I was always part of the in crowd, and drinking became a part of the in crowd. Smoking weed became a part of the in crowd. I never experienced with myself. I never experienced with hard drugs till about 16 when ecstasy came into play. House parties, party buses. Um, and then I told myself I would never do anything more. I told myself I would never touch cocaine. All of my older buddies were into it. My brothers were getting into it. 17, 18, that's when ecstasy kind of switched over to MDMA, and it was more of a natural high, less of a come down. You weren't mixing everything. That's when music festivals started. My brother sold weed in high school, and I kind of got into that throughout most of my later high school years. I worked my ass off though. I was never lazy. I've had my first job when I was 13, working in a cedar mill, 12-hour days, 4 days on, 4 days off. Like I was always a hustler. So when I got and found, I could sell weed and make some money and do that, I got into that. And then after graduation, it was just normal partying. Wasn't doing drugs every day or anything. It was like a couple times a month, big events, birthdays, big celebrations, music festivals, weekend drinking, maybe a midweek bonfire or something like that. I didn't need it. As my younger 20s rolled in, partying got, a little more, but it was sustainable. I was, relationships and stuff ended because of it, but I was managing one of the biggest gyms in British Columbia. After that, I started 3 companies. I had a nonprofit. I was, it didn't really affect my life until probably I was about 22, 23. And that's when I started losing jobs because I wasn't showing up because I was hungover, and started doing, that's when I got, probably 22, 21 was when I started dabbling in the coke, and it got, more and more. And that progressed, not crazy. Drinking and drugs, Cocaine, I mean, I should say. I smoked weed here and there, but it wasn't like some people that smoked it every day. I would do it here and there, take one little puff and I'd be on my ass. But it was more the alcohol and the cocaine. It just made me feel friggin' alive. And it made me feel like the cocaine actually made me feel like I belonged. I don't know why, even when no one else was doing it, it made me feel like I belonged in my own self. I had a lot of, you know, I was an insecure kid, maybe because growing up I was living in my older siblings' shoes. I never really found who I was or what I was. I was always kind of pushed into something just because my family and my brothers and I just became them. And when I'd be out with friends, the best friends since high school, I'd be sitting there drinking like I don't belong here. I don't even think they like me, blah blah blah, just rolling in my head and I just had these thoughts and the cocaine really kind of stopped that. Um but it was still kind of a party drug at that point. It was a good fun time. I didn't use it to hide any major emotions or feelings or trauma or anything because I didn't have that. But when I was about 23, I was in between jobs and I got connected with some friends back from my hometown. I was living in Vancouver, the city then, and they were really big into this was before the weed was legal yet in Canada, but it was big in Vancouver. There's still there was you could buy it in stores and stuff. It was just a gray area, but they had built up this little empire and they loved me since high school and said, hey, why don't you know so many people? Why don't you get in on this with us? So then I hopped in on that and a year after that, just boom, making crazy money. Got to the point where me and a friend had a big gig going on. We were flying stuff across Canada. It was like the movies. We were hopping on airplanes with suitcases full of marijuana. Had it down, burner phones, freaking 3 apartments in Vancouver. He had a Bentley we were driving around with. We were rock stars. We were going to Cancun, Playa del Carmen every other weekend. When we weren't there, we're in Vegas probably 2-3 times a month. Living the high life, man, making thousands and thousands a day. And the heavy part of that lasted a year. And that's when cocaine progressed. But again, it was still partying. It was like, freaking, we're rock stars. Let's do it. Come 25, 2 years later, is somewhat like a movie. I wanted to get out. I had, shit ton of money saved up and I was going to get into, real estate and go back to school and set myself up for the future. This wasn't a life thing for me like it was for my buddies. So I set up some people that I knew on the East Coast and went out to introduce them. And the last 2 months, the Canadian Special Drug Task Force had been watching us. And in that hotel where I was introducing them, they busted the door down, guns ablazing, got thrown in jail. And I got released on bail. But that was my first kind of probably big trauma. That was not easy going home to my family. I was on the CBC News, which is like, Fox News out here. CNN. I was all across. Every friend, family saw me on the news for 2 days. It was one of the biggest drug busts in Newfoundland history. And so I came home and my family, my siblings picked me up from the airport 4 days later. After I just spent 3 or 4 nights in a Newfoundland, it's called Her Queen's Majesty Prison. It's one of the oldest prisons in Canada. It was brutal. Just no sleep, junkies coming in everything, trying to fight me, smashing their heads against the wall, fighting with guards. I just wanted to get the hell out of there. So I was happy to be home. I went home, kind of told my family everything, but that's when the burden of, guilt, shame started hitting me hard, and failure especially. I went out to my parents that night when my siblings picked me up. Next day I went back to my place in Vancouver and called my dealer right away. And that moment was when cocaine became more medicinal than just a party drug. That's when I started doing it on my own. The waking up every morning with anxiety and stress from everything I had done and building up these ideas in my head that my whole life was a failure, that all these other things, running these successes that most people would think of, running massive gyms and owning businesses at the age of 19, 20, was more in my head. I made it out to be like, yeah, but they didn't go anywhere. You're a failure. You suck, blah, blah, blah. And not to mention in between then all the stress of this possibly going to jail. That trial lasted 3 years. All my money was gone. I had people threatening my lives. They thought I was a rat because I didn't end up going to prison. I put all my money into the best lawyers in Canada with my dad's help, and I was the one that got out. They said, there's enough evidence against him to become innocent. And once that happened, I had people threatening my life, showing up in my house. I walking the streets in Vancouver. I got jumped several times. I was at restaurants just beaten to shit. People calling me rats. So there was just a lot of kind of a black cloud over me for a while. And, I was using cocaine 3-4 times a week. As the years progressed, it was every single day, and to the point where the last 4 years, probably since 27 to 10 months ago, I was using it every single day. It was the only thing that made me feel normal. When I just didn't feel like, not that I deserved to live or anything, but I didn't know what I was living for anymore. But I got to the really good point of hiding it, because the last thing after all this guilt and shame and failure was now to come out and tell everyone I'm a drug addict. So I couldn't do that. So that would just put me over the edge. I kept thinking to myself, nope, you're either going to get clean on your own and just no one's going to know, and no one will ever know you're a drug addict, or you're going to die from this. And I accepted that. And I was at the point where, I was living with someone, a partner for 4 years, and she had no idea. My family had no idea. My work, never any sign of it. I just got so good at hiding it and lying, to the point where I would start writing down my lies in books, and so I wouldn't get caught up on another lie. And then it got to the point where I tried doing little stints of not drinking or doing coke for 2 days, and I couldn't last more than that. And I told myself, it's probably, you had this thought a couple of years ago where you're gonna get clean on your own or you're gonna die from this. And now it was at the point where I'm gonna die with it or die from it. And especially with all the fentanyl going around, and 80% of cocaine had it in Vancouver at that point, and it scared the shit out of me. But I couldn't stop, and I was too scared of the shame and guilt that came from announcing it to the world, or it was more my friends and family, that anything letting them down once more. But it got to the point where my lies caught up with me, and my brother kept poking around saying, is everything okay, and the partner I was living with at the time knew something was up. Something came up where someone had messaged her saying, Kurt's supposed to do this job, he owes me $3,000, what's going on here? And that's where I said, I've got this opportunity right now, I don't want to do this anymore. This is the point of time, or else now I'm just going to lose even more. And one of the hardest moments of my life, when I looked them in the eye and I said, I'm a drug addict and an alcoholic. And it was scary. I broke down in tears. I cried all night. Never cried that hard in my life. Just shaking, trembling. My couple siblings. The brother came over right away with his girlfriend. We talked all night. And from that point on, it was a good turning point. I went to bed that night feeling better. I woke up the next morning like this huge weight had been lifted off my shoulder. I started making, I said it the next day, I was at a psychology appointment, talking to a counselor, a psychologist. I was doing Smart Recovery online 3 days a week. I went back to work a few days later. I hadn't told my parents yet. My mom was going through chemotherapy. She had just got cancer about 6 months before that. So I didn't want to burden them with more stress, especially when she's healing. So that was one thing that really killed me inside, was not being honest with my parents. They had supported me so much, right? So 3 weeks into being sober, I lost 3 weeks. I killed it. And that was the person I was living with at the time. She went away, thought everything was going to be fine. I kept telling her everything was going to be fine, knowing the moment she went away, that would be my chance to just one last time get it out of your system, and she'll never know. They'll never know. No one will know because I'm on my own in the apartment. I got to go to work today, and then boom, it's a weekend, and then I'll leave tomorrow morning, go to my side job, and no one will ever know. I'll clean up nice. And no, not the way it works, or at least the universe didn't want it to work like that for me. So that all came out. The next day I was lost all that life. Apartment we had built. I was living on a friend's sofa for a week, 2 weeks actually, just depressed. Mm, That's when it hit me hard. Before I was getting sober for everyone else. I was getting sober for my siblings. I was getting sober for that person at the time. And this is when it was like, fuck, I can't do it for that. I need to get sober for myself. Like, can't just keep getting sober and then once I have a scapegoat where I can, go away for a weekend and do it all again, then what's the use, right? And you're just gonna turn back to your old ways. So I got my own place in like a shared house, like a little bedroom, a little kind of a dump. Um, and just started secluded myself for one, and then started putting in the work. I was always, like I said, a hustler and a self-educator. If I didn't know something, I learned it, whether it was through a book or a video or an audio. So that's what I did. And I sat down in my room and I went to the library and I got about 10 books on addiction and recovery, and I read them the first week. Went back to the library. I was taking about 3, 4 books a day. I would wake up at 5 a.m. every morning. I'd read till 8 p.m. or 8 a.m. Sorry, till I had to go to work. I'd come home from work and I just keep reading, and started a new social media account, which helped a lot. And I educated myself on why the brain was doing what it was doing and why I was doing what I was doing. And it that was my first step of getting sober, and it worked. Um, and then I got to the point where I was like, this can't be it. And I'm scared I'm gonna fall into the same routine. This just can't be it. I feel sober, but I feel like I'm starting to get happy again, but I still didn't have that joy, that happiness waking up that I knew was on the other side of sobriety, that I'd seen on people's social medias, that I'd read in these books. And I was really big into cycling at the time. I was forced to be really big into cycling because I lost my license for a few years before that. So I was biking to work every day. I was cycling a lot. I enjoyed it. So 2.5 months into my sobriety, I bought a new bike and I flew to Seattle because the borders were still closed, but you're allowed to fly down. I brought shit ton of gear with me and I just hit the road. I said I wanted to bike the Pacific Coast Highway, and my family was like, "You're fucking nuts, but do it, man. Do whatever makes you happy." And it was scary for me for sure because what I didn't like being in my own head. That's when I got on my own, that's when I turned to drugs and alcohol because I didn't really like the thoughts that were happening in my head. They started going away more as I got sober. But it was like, shit, I'm gonna go on this bike trip all by myself in the middle of the wilderness and pushing myself and being literally stuck in my head the whole day. It can go one of two ways. It can be great or it can be really bad. And luckily for me, it was a trip of a lifetime. It changed my life. It propelled my sobriety tenfold. And I would wake up every morning and just ride for 8 to 10 hours a day, further than I'd ever ridden ever. Like I would train, I would ride one big bike ride a week before that. That's all I really had to train. And I was doing more in 2 weeks each day. I was riding, longest ride I'd ever done was 45K. And I was riding about 75 to 80 a day through some of the hilliest terrain through Washington. No turning back. There's no towns, there's no cities for 2 days. through the Olympic National Park and small campgrounds. It was starting to come into fall, so the campgrounds were dead. It was raining, start of fall. It pushed me mentally and physically to the point where I'm like, holy shit, like this is a whole other chapter of my life. I know I can do, if I can do this, I know I can do anything. And that was just the beginning. That was the first 2 weeks. I my bike was falling apart on me until I got it wicked into shape. Like I was doing all the work on my own, fixing it up. Um, to one weekend, I spilled. I was camping. I was cooking pasta, and I spilled the pot on my shoe with my foot. I got a 3rd-degree burns across my entire foot. Kept riding. 2 weeks later, I got Achilles tendonitis in my right ankle. Kept riding. Got it in my left ankle. I was riding for 2 weeks with Achilles tendonitis in both ankles. I had to lower my days, but I just pushed through it. And every night at the camp, I would find a campground, and every night I would sit there and think about my life and what I had done and what I had done that day. And it was almost like every day I was riding, everyone said, "Oh, just throw on music, throw on audiobooks," but I didn't. It was just me in the road. And it was almost like I was meditating the entire time. First couple of weeks I was thinking a lot, but after that it was like I was just meditating, almost like just no thought, and being alone in my own head became the norm, and it was something that I now loved. And as the weeks went on, I just grew so much as a person, and and that's why I created my new account. It was at that right now it's the Sober Nomad, but before it was the Sober Rider. And I started posting all my photos, and all these sober people kept following me and just reaching out to me, and this community built on my little Instagram. And I was supposed to go all the way to San Diego, but I got to a point where I was in San Francisco. I went to Yosemite because I'd always want to see it. And once I hit Yosemite, I was only supposed to be there, I think, for 2 nights, and I spent 4 nights there, and I just didn't want to leave. It was like my little haven. And it was just me doing hikes every day on my own, and just watching the stars at night by a campfire. And it just hit me like, man, I'm okay to be on my own now. I'm okay. I don't have any of these negative thoughts. I'm so proud of myself for what I've done. It was the first time in my life I'd ever been proud of myself. So got back into service. I head back to San Francisco, and instead of going another 2 weeks, I just called my mom. I was like, I'm ready to come home. I'm ready to start my new life, this new sober life. And I did. I flew home the next morning. Got home, got a new place, and that's when I really wanted to do more with my recovery. My entrepreneur kind of mindset, my hustler mindset kicked in, and I started researching ideas. I'd always been into good technology, and I started reaching out to people with these ideas. And I finally found a platform that allowed me to kind of create this, and another sober app, you might say, but one where you could learn from all these people I had just learned with the last 5 months. Rather than have an app tell you what to do every day, it was going to be people like myself, or people, podcasters like you guys, or people like Danny and Mike Fiore and LC and Sober Onions podcast, Crystal Moral, all these people that had taught me how to live a happy, sober life. And it was going to be like courses, but it's evolved into so much more. And that's when the Sober app kind of came about. And Danny came on board with me as my business partner. And, that's evolved so much more now too. And yeah, so we've created an app where it's just this huge community of people who have succeeded in sobriety and now want to help others live a happy life sober. A lot of us, we get sober, we hit this wall where, like with me before my bike trip, where it's like, this can't be it. There's got to be more to life than this. Just trying not to drink every day can't be the rest of my life. And I think we've got over 4,000 hours of content, YouTube videos, podcasts, original courses. We're going to start be doing a lot of live events in May, where we want to show people that getting sober is the first part, but living sober and living happy is something like no other, especially when we're living in a world so consumed by alcohol. Uh, there's just such a big life out there for you once you get sober and stay sober and start finding the things that make you happy. And for me now, after that bike trip and this app and having this community of friends and collaborators, I wake up every morning with joy. The same joy I used to have as a kid when I would see a playground, or my parents would say, okay, you can go ride your bike before dinner. And I would hit the slopes in the forest or go catching frogs. It's like, that's that joy that, everyone dreams of, that happiness, I guess. And I can assure you that, like I said, getting sober is one thing, and then staying sober and learning from others and seeing what makes you happy. It's a powerful thing. So you can find us, our app's called the Sober app. You can find us on Instagram at the sober.app. You can find us, our links are all in our bio. We were on the app, Google Play Store, we're on the Apple Store. You can use this on the browser version. We got big things coming. This is just kind of our first version. And we are a second version, which we're going to redevelop the entire app, is going to be mind blowing. Unlike, we've got our tracking in our communities like all the other apps have, but our community of actual live events we're going to have, we've got fitness, we've got yoga, we've got nutrition, we've got, urges, how to fight urges and deal with emotions and narcissists in your life, and every category you can think of. There's videos for that and audios, and we're gonna have courses almost every day, 1 or 2 courses. So hit us up, check us out, and reach out to me. You can find me on Instagram at the.sober.nomad, and check out our sober app page, the sober.app.